Okay, welcome back to the Moxi Shorts Sew Along. Today, in this part of the video, I'm going to talk to you about sewing the briefs. So I have a separate video on sewing the optional compression shorts, but if you want to do the briefs instead of the compression shorts, I'm going to go ahead and show you how to do that right now. So this is going to be assembled separately from the outer Moxi short and then attached at the waistband. So what you need in order to sew the briefs are the briefs back and the briefs front. Now these might look a little bit different than you're used to, but the construction of them is really cool. So I'm excited to share that with you. And then you're going to need some fabric with good stretch. I like to use something nice and lightweight because, you know, when I'm wearing these in the summer and it's really hot outside, I like to use a nice lightweight wicking fabric. So that's what I've got here. And then you're gonna want to grab some elastic, some 1/4 inch or 3/8 inch elastic. And you wanna kind of pre-stretch that a little bit. And then on your pattern piece, you should have a measurement of how long you need to cut your pieces. So these are the elastic's gonna go around the leg openings. And so, you know, for my size, I need 2 pieces that are 18 3/4 inches. So that's what we're gonna be doing there. And the way that we apply this elastic is very similar to the way that elastic is applied in swimwear. So if you are making a swim version of the Moxi shorts and you want to have the briefs underneath, you can just make sure that you're using swim elastic. And if you're not making them for swim, you can just use regular elastic. Now I've actually used regular elastic in some of my swimsuits, and it honestly has not made a giant difference. I don't have a personal pool, so I'm not swimming every day, but I think if you're in a pinch and you just want to finish them and you don't have swim elastic, I think regular elastic works out okay too. So what you're going to want to do, both of these pieces are cut on the fold. Now I have a little note here on mine to add height at the top. I added height to the rise of my Moxi shorts, and I'm going to match that with the briefs on the front. There's this little triangle here. You can cut that in if you want. This basically is just going to show you where I just make a little snip in the fabric about where my center front is. So I've got my fabric folded. The stretch is going this way, of course. I'm going to place my pattern piece and then fold it down with my weights. Make sure that it's nicely lined up along that fold. Then I'm just going to grab my rotary cutter and cut it out. So cutting the front first. So this is where I'm going to add a little bit of height up here just to match what I did on the shorts. And then I'm tapering it down on the side, so the side seam remains the same. If you're adding height all the way across, then you're making your side seam taller, and that's not what I need personally. So got that cut. Now this is where I'm going to make a little snip right here, just a tiny one, just to kind of show myself where that fold was. And these are sewn, is marked on the pattern piece, with this 3/8 inch seam allowance, just like the rest of the pattern, except for when you're attaching the bias. Well, even when you're attaching the bias tape, actually. So these are attached very similarly. And if you haven't made your own underwear, you can even see if these work as a base for kind of a regular pair of underwear too. You just need to finish the waistband somehow. So there's my front. Cut that on the fold. I'm gonna put that aside. And then fold my fabric again. And I have a separate video that walks you through finding the grain line on a knit if you have not figured out how to do that yet. I have that separate video and I'll link it in my blog post so that you can see. So now I've got my back piece, and I'm gonna make sure that I have enough room here as I'm folding the fabric. Looks like I need to do this a little bit. Okay, that's better. Now, you'll notice I flipped my piece over because I'm trying to use the most, of my fabric that I can. But I want to point out to you that there's this dotted line right here. This is where the front and the back are going to be sewn together. So you want to make sure that you mark that somehow for yourself, whether that's a little snip into the side seams on, when you have it like over here, a little snip, the line's right here. You just want to make sure that you mark that somehow because you're going to need that point. So just keep that in mind. Now I did not add to the back rise, so those should be just per the pattern piece here. Okay, so I've got that. I think I mentioned in the other video, my rotary cutter blade really needs a change. I don't know why I'm willing to spend so much on fabric, but rotary cutter blades, suddenly I get all cheap and I don't want to change them when I should. So, got this cut out here, okay? And then that line is right there. I'm just gonna mark it personally with a little snip. If it makes you feel more comfortable, you could mark it with chalk if you wanted to or something like that. So I can see when I lay out my front piece that my snip is here, so my line is just right across here. Okay, so cut that, then go ahead and pre-stretch and cut your elastic, and then we're gonna come back and I'll show you in a second how to sew these together. It's really kind of neat to watch, so I'll be right back with that. I've gone ahead and I've marked my line here just because I thought that might be easier to show you as I'm doing this video. So you're gonna take, this is the back, you're gonna take the front and lay it right sides together with the back, lining up the front on top of the back at that line. So what we're gonna do now is we're gonna stitch across here, and you can see these triangles extend a little bit. That's okay, because when we stitch with our 3/8 inch seam allowance, it's gonna be right where those two meet. So go ahead and go over and stitch that. I do this with a regular sewing machine. I suppose it could be done with a chain stitch on a cover stitch machine, or you can't really do it with your serger because of the way that it's in there. So I would recommend a sewing machine, but it's up to you. So I'm gonna go ahead and stitch that, and then I'll come back and show you what you do next. So I've gone ahead and stitched them together. This is the back and this is the front on top. So you're going to flip this over like that, so that from the right side you just have this one seam. And then it's optional to top stitch this right here if that kind of raw edge bothers you. It's gonna get the leg seams, when the elastic's sewn, it's gonna get folded under essentially. So you could finish this edge with a serger on the back side. That it should be kind of flopping around. You can finish that with a serger and then top stitch if you want, or you can just baste along the leg openings to keep the two together at this point. So it's up to you. I'm gonna go finish with mine with a serger and stitch it down just because that's my personal preference. And then I'll be back to show you the next step. At this same point, you can also, actually, might be more efficient, if you just went ahead and sew those side seams. So I'm gonna sew the side seams on both sides, right sides together. Again, I'm gonna use my serger for this, but you could use like a lightning bolt stitch or something like that on a sewing machine. So I'm gonna go do both of those steps, and then I'll come back and show you how we get ready to apply the elastic. So I've got my briefs here that I've, on the wrong side, you can see I finished that edge, and then I top stitch it with just kind of a 3mm straight stitch. It's not gonna stretch right there anyway, really. So I've got my center front marked. I need to mark my center back. Somehow I missed that when I was cutting them out. It's gonna be important in a minute. So, got that. And then you're also going to want to quarter your leg seams. So you can do that by just taking that side seam. This is the leg opening here. You can kind of pretend that that's in the middle here. Find kind of what's on the other side. You make a little clip. You don't want to go too deep. And then you can make little clips on the other side. So you're going to want to quarter those because that way when you apply the elastic you can do it evenly. And then you want to grab your elastic and pre-stretch it a bit, cut it out, stretch it before you cut it out, and then you're going to sew it into a loop just with a little zigzag. So I just overlap it about 1/2 inch or so and just sew that into a loop, and you'll end up with something that looks like this loop of elastic that's the right length for your size. And you can quarter that as well. Now I like to use, you can't clip into the elastic, so I use these friction markers that are awesome, come off with heat, to just mark my quarter points on the elastic. And then once you've done that, you're ready to sew the elastic in. Now you can try these briefs on at this point and just kind of confirm that they're going to work for you. Sometimes I find them a little cheeky, so you know, that's something to keep in mind about how you feel about where you want things to sit, you know, in your shorts or in your exercise wear. Another fun option is you can always use the, like, as long as you make sure the rise is right, you could use something like the briefs from the North Shore swimsuit. There's also a thong option included. I'm not going to walk you through that with a video because it's very constructed very similarly to the briefs. But you can try them on at this point, make sure they work for you, and then go ahead and I like to flip them inside out at this point. And you're going to line up those quarter points. You're going to sew the elastic to the wrong side. So you can just use a clip or a pin to hold it in place. And then you're going to either zigzag it with a sewing machine or serge it on. When you serge, you're not going to be cutting anything off. So you're just going to be getting it on there. Now really, technically the most, we're quartering it here, but when you're sewing elastic onto underwear, there doesn't really need to be very much stretch in the front. You want most of the stretch to be kind of around your bottom. So keep that in mind. I always quarter it, and then I go back and I adjust where all that stretch is. So this is the back of the underwear. That looks like a good amount of stretch. You don't really need a lot of stretch through the crotch. That looks like a good amount of stretch for the front. That looks pretty good. So I'm going to go over to my serger, and I am going to serge these on, and then I'll come back and I'll show you what that looks like, and then we're going to flip it to the wrong side again and top stitch it on the right side, either with a zigzag or with a cover stitch machine if you have one available. The key to this is if you're, if you're zigzagging, is just making sure that your inner zigzag gets as close to the edge of this elastic as possible so that it doesn't flip around. So I'm going to go serge this on, and I will be right back. Okay, so I've gone ahead and serged that on. Some people do this with their blade off, by the way. I actually tend to leave it on. I just don't, cut anything off when I do it, but it just kind of helps me line it up better for some reason. So this is the wrong side of the briefs facing up. And now you're going to turn this in again toward the wrong side. Okay, so you can hold this down, if it's easier for you, you can hold it down with clips. I kind of like to top stitch it as I go. I just find it's easier for me to like turn it and just hold it taut rather than adding in a bunch of clips or pins along there. So do whatever is easier for you. You do want to make sure that you get as close as you can. So the edge of the elastic is right here. You want to get as close as you can to that edge. So because if you don't, then it's going to be kind of flipping around a little bit. You also want to make sure that you're flipping it as much as you can like that. You don't want to be folding over extra fabric. You just want to be folding right up to that edge, if you can see that. Okay, and you're going to be stretching it a little bit just to keep it wrinkle free as you top stitch. So I'm going to go over to my cover stitch machine and top stitch. Keep in mind you can totally do this with a 3-step zigzag, so if that's what you've got, then go right ahead, and honestly sometimes I feel like that's easier. Just make sure that you've switched over to a ballpoint needle in your sewing machine if you were using a universal needle or a sharp needle for your sewing your stretch woven. So I'm going to go top stitch it and I will be right back. So I've cover stitched my elastic down. It's got good stretch still, which is what we want, so it can stretch over our bodies. I usually, just a little note about cover stitching, if you pull your needle threads forward, cut them, and then pull your project out through the back, you will essentially tie off those cover stitching threads. But on things like this, that might get a lot of wear and tear, I do actually like to tie them again on my own. So I'll do that just, you know, to make sure, because it's always annoying when you finished a project and then it unravels quickly. So I just give that an extra tie, and then I'll snip it off. If you've used a sewing machine, you'll just have, you know, back stitched. So you can see this is the wrong side. So you can see where I've serged it and cover stitched over the top. This is the right side. So got that done. So you're going to repeat that process with the other leg opening. And then after you're done, you'll be ready to add it into your outer Moxi shorts. And you're just going to slip it right in there and, you know, line them up at the top of the waist. And then you're ready for attaching our waistband, which we're going to do tomorrow. If you try these on at this point and you feel like, they don't fit me exactly the way I want, one, good news, they don't use very much fabric. You can recut them and make some changes if you feel like. Some people need a narrower crotch, so you could trim the crotch a bit. Some need a wider crotch, so you could add, you know, a little bit of space along the edges. Some people might prefer more bottom coverage, in which case you can kind of draw this curve out a little bit. You could use a favorite pair of briefs on your own as an example. So that's another possibility too if you don't own something like the North Shore. You know, to kind of copy the openings from that. You can just use something that you already have in your closet. So I hope this is helpful, and I can't wait to finish up our shorts tomorrow.